Welcome back. I'm sitting in Texas, still haven't moved yet. I didn't win the lottery, so yep, here I am. Right, right. But I do have somebody on the other side of the planet Earth with me today. And this is interesting because it's the second Brit we have with us. And it's the second Brit that moves from an island to an island. So I think this is something with Brits. Or moved from an island to a smaller island to a much more limited island. Welcome to the show, Hem Brewster. How are you?
Hi, I'm doing great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fine. You we talked a little bit beforehand here. I do because I wouldn't be able to keep my face straight whatsoever. Where are you from originally?
So, originally, I was from the UK, so I come from a tiny place right in the south of England called Brighton.
Yeah, I've actually been.
A lot of people have, yeah.
Right?
A lot of people end up in Brighton. I'm not really sure why. Like, talking with people here in on the island, and they're just like, "Oh yeah, I know Brighton. I've been to Brighton." Like,
wow, wow.
Why?
What is it in Brighton that makes you leave Brighton and move to an island south of the main Icelandic island? Correct. What's the name? Where are you? Explain.
Iceland is like quite a big island. It's like 4 or 5 times bigger than the whole of the UK. I've come from a very tiny island. Sorry, I'm now living in a very tiny island to the south of that, which is about 45 minutes to walk from one end to the other, like the whole island. And it's called Vestmannaeyjar.
I'm not going to try to pronounce that.
In English, it's often referred to as the Westman Islands.
That I can say Westman. That's not a problem. Yeah. So you move from an island to a smaller island, and we were talking beforehand. Thanks God that I now know that this smaller island, as you say, is 45 minutes to walk. How do you get there?
So you take a ferry. The ferry is about 45 minutes, goes roughly 7 times a day. If the weather is good and everything is fine, there's no problems. But if there is problems, the ferry is anywhere between 3 hours and 4.5 hours, and that trip only goes twice a day. And if the weather is really trash, there's no ferries whatsoever. And sometimes there'll be flights in some months. Sometimes, maybe. Yeah.
Wow. Like the images I get on in my head is really like you go to town on the main island once a week to get your groceries. Hopefully you make it back. There are no cars whatsoever. You have to just dock your boat outside your house. My vision I have here is incredible.
Yeah, not quite. So yeah, like the rest of Iceland, we have roads. We've had them here for a while. We have hot water too, which is we do have to mention that because it did only come in like the 60s, I think it was. So like it is an ordeal. But yeah, like we have cars, we have houses, exactly the same as you would imagine any slightly bigger village or slightly smaller town, and we have all the same facilities that you guys would. So we have 2 grocery stores called Bonus and Kronan, and they will have what you would expect to find in a grocery store. The selection, I'm not going to lie, is not fantastic. It's not a great endless supply of stuff. It is, what do you need? Do you need pasta? All right, here's 3 types of pasta and be happy with it. How many types of apples do you really need? So we have like 2 or 3 types of apples. But if the weather is really bad and we're cut off from the mainland for a couple of days or a week or so, the fresh produce drops down, but we have enough supply of dry stuff and all the other good frozen things that we are still able to eat and function as normal. So yeah,
I don't have any problem to freeze stuff. It's just to put them outside.
Well, it's not frozen all year round. So over winter, it's below like I don't know Fahrenheit, so I'm just going to do a Celsius. Dips below freezing quite often and for quite long periods. But in the summer, we'll still be in single digit Celsius, so we'll still be somewhere between like 5 and 9. Double digits is a hot day. You'll see people taking off their t-shirts. They'll be like stripping down. It's like, this is so hot. When we had like 17 or 18 degrees here, almost all of us were just like, we're dead. This is too hot.
Well, as people say here, like how can you not be used to the cold? And I said, well, the houses and the environment here is not made for the cold. In Iceland, it must be different, like vice versa. Your environment, your housing, everything is made for the cold. So when you get a hot spell, you're not used to it. Your houses are not used to it. You don't have air conditioning. I
Right,
assume
yeah.
it doesn't exist. So therefore, it just makes the
Yeah.
situation harder.
Yeah, so like all industry buildings and all like bigger buildings, anything that has a business in it will most likely have AC. And all our cars obviously have AC. So we are still able to escape from the heat. And I do use that because obviously I used to live in the UK and like temperatures of 25-ish was still like fairly normal, but I was dying. Like I'm so much gladder I live in a cold climate. But like, yeah, like dealing with the heat is a little bit more difficult, but it's still like functional. And if you ever get too hot, you just walk around outside for a bit, and if there's a breeze, you'll like start freezing your nuts off. So like it's not too bad. It's just those like 2 or 3 days a year in which we may be so hot we just all decide to lie down and bask in the sun.
You see all the memes on Facebook. I survived the heat wave in Iceland 2024.
Yep.
We get here in Texas. I survived the cold 2024.
I mean, like, yeah, like most of what we have here is designed for cold, but because half the year it is not consistently snowing, it's not consistently below zero. It just needs to be insulated enough that we can keep the heat in and that we can keep the cold out where need be. And you know, joys of double glazing, it does most of that job on its own, and everybody has like heating here. So nothing is run on gas or anything like that. So it's all run on like electricity or geothermal stuff.
Yeah, that is a big thing. At least where I come from in Sweden, geothermal stuff is super big and very advantage. Like if you have a house that has it, it's very cheap to run your house on it.
Yep.
It's very beneficial. So what brought you now from this one island to an even smaller, colder island? Why did you do that kind of crazy move?
The traditional love. My partner actually comes from this small island. So it was a case of like when I met him, first off, he was living in Reykjavik finishing out his electrical masters, and he was like, "Hey, you could come live here with me." And I'm like, "Reykjavik? Yeah, that's a bit like Britain." Yeah, I mean, it's smaller than Britain. It's going to be half as loud. And yeah, when I stayed there, it was quiet compared to living just outside of Brighton, which is consistently loud and noisy and awful. And I was like, yeah, this is nice, kind of quiet. And then my partner was like, "Hey, do you remember that small island I took you to the first time you visited?" I want to go live there now. I finished my master's. I'm like, well, in for a penny, in for a pound. Let's go.
Oh my goodness. So he is a master electrician.
Yep.
And how does work it on a small island? I can guess like electricity, you need that, and there's always work for an electrician. But how do people live and make money on a small island? Do they go to the big island every day or somewhat?
No. So if you live on our island, the Westman Islands, you do not commute to the mainland. It's not something anyone ever does. It's like having to be at the ferry like half hour, 20 minutes early, taking the 45-minute trip, and then you have to travel at least like 45 minutes to get to the next like proper town. So like nobody commutes. That is a ridiculous thing to do, especially if the weather changes and you can't get back home, or the weather changes and you have to go to the other ferry but you haven't booked your car on the other ferry because there's only a limited amount of car spaces, and then you have to go back home and you've left your car in the wrong. So nobody does that. That's just another thing that
Yeah,
we
that's
do.
kind of,
If you are commuting to the mainland, you're there for like a whole week. That's what you do if you have to go work the mainland. But no, like as a lot of this island is dedicated to the fishing industry. So a lot of folks are fishermen, or they're supporting the fishing industry in some manner, turning the fish into meals or into fish meal, or 100 other processes that comes with running boats and keeping everything going. Like there's a lot around that. But we're also quite big on tourism. So the beluga whale sanctuary is here. They have little grey and little white. They're trying to rehabilitate and put back out into a sanctuary. So there's that here. There's a lot of boat tours that go out around the island. There's a lot of coach tours, even though it's a very small island. There's a lot to see, and there's a lot of history here. There is a museum which is dedicated to the volcanic eruption that happened on the island about 40 years ago, roughly around this point. So like there's a lot of tourism, and it's also home to the Westman Islands. Isn't just one island, it's actually some smaller islands around the edge of the one where everybody lives, and that is home to the largest population of Atlantic puffins in the world. So for about 6 months of the year we have puffins. It's amazing.
That's
So
pretty.
there's a lot of tourism on here too.
I get that. And it's we said it before we started pressing record, but I think it needs to be said. It's about 4,000 to 5,000 people living on this island. Just
Yeah, and they'll live.
Probably give an idea to people how many people we're talking.
Yeah, and they will live here all year round. So tourism still really is a tourist season because, for example, if there's no boats going, ferries going, you can't get anyone to visit the island. So tourism just shuts down over like autumn and winter. It's just not a thing. You have some very brave souls who attempt it, and we're like, nice, you regretting this decision, aren't you? But some people try it. And otherwise, they're mostly dedicated to fishing. But for an electrician, there is a company on the islands that is like big on doing as much electrical work as they can. You need electricians to deal with the boats because they need engineers and electricians to keep those going when they're in dock. And house electricians, just someone you call if there's an emergency. Like there are lots of people who do that. So yeah, like it's just like any other small town, except we have slightly limited resources. And when things go wrong, we have to try and figure out how to fix them with the resources that we have instead of, yeah, I'm going to call Amazon and get them to deliver it this afternoon. Like that's just not a thing.
I don't think Amazon is coming this afternoon to y'all.
Nah. So Amazon Prime, not a thing here. So I've spoken to some friends like, oh, living in Iceland must be lovely. I'd love to come and live it here. I'm like, no, you rely too much on what you consider the necessities and luxuries of life. And don't get me wrong, they are necessities and luxuries of life. But if you can't live without them, you can't come and live on the island. There's just no way.
No, exactly. Did you know when you moved to Iceland, generally what you were getting yourself into?
Sort of, yes, but also massively no. So I've been coming backwards and forwards to Iceland for a little bit before I moved here. I've been here for like a month or so, like little breaks like that. So I knew, and all across the year as well, not just like in the summer when it was sunny. So I'd been here almost all the times, but I'd never been on the island for those times. And yeah, I knew that food is incredibly expensive. It is not something you go to like, oh yeah, I'll go buy like a $2 this. No, it is expensive to eat here. I knew that on the island, there's no public transport. There's like 1 or 2 guys with taxis, but otherwise you call your friends to pick you up if you need help or anything like that. Like you rely on your neighbors and people around you and your family that you have. So I knew that was difficult. I already knew that Amazon was not a thing. So for like the day-to-days, I kind of knew roughly what I was getting into, but it was the consistent like year long of like, yep, the snow is here. There's very limited things that you can do, or it becomes more dangerous to drive, especially for me. So there are kind of like life things that you just don't realize that become way more difficult if you don't have access to all the resources in the world. And they aren't instant. And especially if the ferry is not running for weather reasons, or because there are minor technical issues. So like, yeah, like you have to learn to survive and adapt with the materials that you have on hand. And those are kind of challenges that I love and adore. And my previous job working at the Beluga Sanctuary, trying to fix things when you don't have the right size pipe becomes a challenge because you're working with live animals and they need these things done. So it's always a challenge to get stuff done. But it is always an interesting one. And sometimes you'll fail and sometimes you won't. And you know, the Icelandic saying here, "Þetta reddast," everything will work itself out. It's definitely opened my eyes up to what is actually important and what isn't. Is it important that I have the latest, that I have a cappuccino with the right syrup in it and has 400 different types of milk in it? No, it doesn't. What matters is that you're not cold and that if your neighbor crashes his car, he's not on his own. So it kind of really makes you think about what's important and what's not. And I never exactly lived a very stressful life beforehand other than family. So moving here was like, oh yeah, this has reinforced my ideals of like, it doesn't matter. Don't give a fuck about it, man. Let it go.
You're right. But what about the language? British and Icelandic is not on the same scale at all.
No. So English, Icelandic has extra letters. The letters that they have that are like comparable to the English ones also don't necessarily sound the same. When you have two different letters together, they'll make a completely different sound. But generally speaking, it is pronounced as it's written. So it's not like English, where sometimes it can be slightly different. But otherwise, Icelandic has sounds that we don't have. There's an earth sound and also a k sound. It sounds like beatboxing. I don't know how to phrase it any other way. It's a double L. So there is a volcano, the one that exploded 2008, whenever it was. I don't remember when it went off. The one that everyone struggled to pronounce the name of and halted all of the planes in Europe for a while. It has a lot of double L's in there, and that's a k sound, which is difficult when you're not used to making that sound in normal conversation. But also it has cases, it also has genders, unlike English, and it also each word, each name has will change depending on the context of the way that you're using it. So this belongs to Helen is actually this belongs to Helen, or this is being about someone. This is about Helen-ish. So the names will change depending on the context. So it's not as easy as just learning the nouns. You have to learn the context and what language, how you're supposed to change the name. So there's lots of things like that that are not exactly intuitive. And yeah, nouns will change based on whether it belongs to you, whether it belongs to me, whether it belongs to them. And them is important as to whether it's one female, two males, a mixture. Like it's a whole thing. Yeah, that look is how I feel. Because also there's very little the grammar structure is also different. So you put like instead of like my potato, it is potato mine. Like it's a bit like that too. So it's difficult. There's very little English translatable skills, transferable skills from English to Icelandic. It's quite different, which is why I think a lot of people in the tourist industry would rather you just speak English than attempt to butcher the Icelandic, because you pronounce it makes slightly different and it would change the word. So yeah, it is.
And you can say something you really didn't intend to or want to do.
Sometimes, but that's also really difficult to do because the pronunciation, you really have to use the accent, and the accent is also really hard. So you just sound like you're talking gobbledygook, and everyone's like, what the
Well, I was just about to ask, how are the accents like from Reykjavik, which is the capital of Iceland, to the different islands? Like, I know Norwegian. Norwegian has two languages in the same
That's so
country.
wild.
Barely understand each other. It's an old Norwegian and new Norwegian, and they're like, you said what? Is it
That's
a little bit of the
wild.
same? Yeah, it is wild. Is it a little bit of the same in the Icelandic? Can you hear if somebody comes from a specific part of the country?
So I still can't speak fluent enough Icelandic because it's really difficult, and I was never a person that was good at languages. So like I opted to take German as a language at school because I had to pick that to be on the academic track. I had no choice. But I'm always really bad at languages. So Icelandic was never something I have fallen into. I've been here 5 years, and I can barely understand what's going on. I can't hear any accent differences, but it is kind of known, except that there kind of are two. So there's kind of like North Iceland and South Iceland, but they're so close it really doesn't matter.
You're just grateful that Iceland is like Sweden and any basically now Iceland sometimes does consider being a Scandinavian country and sometimes not. They're a little bit like, today we are, today we're not. Anyway,
Yeah, we'll go with Nordic, it's fine.
we'll see what we want to do or not.
Mhm.
I realize that to be that kind of a country and quite isolated as they are, they need to know English to be able to at least work outside their own little boundaries
Yeah,
there. So they start teaching English fairly early to the kids in school. How about TV and radio and stuff like that? I assume that is a lot in English as well.
most of the TV and the radio pretty much is just Icelandic, or it will be dubbed and subbed in. Like it's pretty much all Icelandic on like the main TV channels. Roof is pretty much just all Icelandic. But it is much more of a variety channel show than I'm used to with like the BBC, which is like there are some very well prepared and scheduled things, and this is exactly the sort of content you expect. And like I heard the other day that on Roof they had someone playing an actual play podcast. They were just sitting around a table playing Dungeons and Dragons in Icelandic. I'm like, what the fuck? This would never be on the BBC. This is amazing. But it's pretty much all in Icelandic. Newspapers also Icelandic, but there are a couple of like specifically English newspapers. The Reykjavik Grapevine, Grapevine, and that caters to the folks who speak English because there's a lot of migrant workers here. There's a lot of folks that have come in to fill the gaps, especially in tourism, where you have to speak English. You cannot be in a tourist front-facing job and not speak English. It's just you can't do it.
It doesn't work out at all.
Mm-mm.
But I believe that mostly people there do speak English, except maybe the older generation, 80 years and above, probably. Sorry.
Yeah, sort of like 40, 50 years and above. It's kind of hit or miss as to whether they'll have like they'll grasp English, they'll get it. I can have conversations with them, but it's not one you could ever talk like deep politics or deep agendas about. Like it's not that in depth. But like generally speaking, yeah, most of the people, especially in Reykjavik, will speak English and they'll speak pretty fluent English. And anywhere where there is specifically like a tourist place to visit, they will speak English. But if you kind of hit the outskirts of like kind of like the capital or specifically like the tourist areas, it becomes much more Icelandic. It becomes much more difficult to have conversations in English. It's pretty much Icelandic, and we'll get through with broken English and my broken Icelandic, and we'll figure it out, but it won't be good. So it definitely becomes more difficult. And like on this island, also, although it is partially like the second industry here is tourism, and we have a lot of migrant workers here like me who speak English and only speak English. Majority of people here will speak Icelandic and they will not really speak English to you. They'll know enough to get by, but this is Iceland and we should be speaking Icelandic, and they're correct, but it does make it sometimes a little difficult.
Yeah, and I think, and I understand that attitude of this is Iceland and we should speak Icelandic, because very often some people come to me and say, habla español. And I'm like, Swedish, Danish, Norwegian, French, English, or bullshit works great, but not Spanish.
loud hand gestures.
I was like, can we pick either of those? Or, sorry,
Yeah.
Spanish, learn something different. You know. And very often when I just rabble out 5 languages plus bullshit, they're like, they don't really have much to come with, you know, even though it's not languages that are spoken here. Well, French maybe be a little bit, but English still is the international language. And I'm of that opinion. If you move somewhere, eventually you will learn Icelandic as well, I believe, because you're still looking into it, you're still trying to learn it, even though it's a hard language. And but you take the traditions where you come, you respect the language, and you at least make an effort of trying to learn it.
Yeah, I have a friend. He's actually from Scotland, and he came to Iceland about 6 months before I did. We came to Iceland at the same time, but he got a job before I did. We didn't know each other before we met here on the island. But he doesn't speak any Icelandic whatsoever, and he doesn't even try. So he won't like we spoke before. The easiest thing to learn in Icelandic is tack, and it will get you so far. It means thank you. All you just need to do is be polite and smile and say tack, and they'll understand that you're trying to thank them for something, and it's just general politeness. But he won't even try that. I'm like, God damn it, dude, come on. It's so easy.
Yeah, and it's like, at least try. I get it. You've been in the country for a short amount of time and you haven't learned it, etc., etc., etc. But take the traditions, take the language, and make an effort.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So, what when we talk about tradition and language, what traditions have you learned that the Icelandic people have that you had no clue about whatsoever? Oh crap! What is this all about? Because it got to be something.
Yeah. So they have a couple of traditions. So I'll try and start roughly through the year because it is kind of like a yearly based stuff.
Are they having a lot of traditions?
Yeah, kind of. So there is Oscardagar, which is the kind of I believe it's around Easter, and they treat it a little bit like Halloween. And what they do is the kids will dress up in costumes. They'll get let out of school early. They'll go harass the businesses to give them candy, and they'll sing at them, and it's really cute. When I went to the beluga sanctuary, they had a little school group come together, and they went to the window and they sang at the belugas, and it was adorable. So like that happens, and they're supposed to like carry around a little bag of ashes and put it on people. And I don't remember that tradition exactly, but that's that's kind of like one thing they do, which is really really cute. They have Buladagar.
Yes, Bolludagur.
No, Buladagar, which is the day where they do kind of like big buns of like choux pastry filled with cream and covered in chocolate, and that will just everybody has that. That's it. That's the day where you have that specifically. Generally, you can't find them outside of that day of the year, but like it's great. There's Þorláksmessu, which is the day before Christmas, and that is where they will just cook up the most vile. They'll cook up fish, which I think is okay, and they'll cook it in the stuff that makes it smell from like outside the building, and it is. I've tried it. It tastes okay, but it's totally not worth the smell. But everybody here loves it. It's a big family thing. Everybody gets together. You burn your you wash the clothes immediately after going home, and you take a shower, and you take another shower, and then the smell will be gone. It's just a nice family thing, like to get together and do. And they have a wedding tradition, which is the first day after you get married, the husband will give a morningjörð, which is morning gift to his bride. And it's usually like a piece of jewelry. And that's really sweet and really cute. Yeah. Yeah. And then we have Christmas.
Your husband.
Yeah, I look over there. He needs a surprise. I was like, oh, there may be a bride related one, but nobody ever told me that. So there we go.
Right?
Yeah. And then they also have at the end of the year, like our 13 days of Christmas, whatever it is, like however many days of Christmas after Christmas, whatever it is. They will send their Christmas little Yule lads home. So at Christmas, instead of having one Santa, they kind of have 13 of them, and they all do weird little things like leave potatoes in your shoes and make sure you close the door. I don't know. It's fucking wild. There's 13 of them. And there's a cat involved. And then there's a mum named Grilla, and she's angry at all the kids. And then on the last day of Christmas, a couple of days after Christmas is gone, beginning of the new year, you walk in a big procession. There's like a bunch of people singing and dancing and carrying statues or whatever it is. Effigies, and then they go up and they say goodbye to the Christmas lads until next year, and they send them back up the mountain. There you go. It's wild.
That sounds like wild.
It really is. In Reykjavik, they normally have like the cat like just outside like one of the major buildings in kind of like the walk where one of the shopping streets is. So they'll normally have a little statue of that up for a while, and I think that stayed up longer than necessary this year. But yeah, it's just a thing they do. It's weird. It's really fun.
I've never heard about it, but at all. Like, not at all. That sounds very interesting.
Yeah, just search like Iceland, your lads, and you'll find out all about them. They're really cool.
Interesting. Huh. And then we send them up the mountain.
And then
Bye.
we send them on the mountain. Laters.
See you next year.
Yep.
What do you miss from UK? Anything that you had there that you cannot get on
So like there's lots of things that we can't like generally get. It's really difficult to get hold of like specialist equipment, and that is going to Reykjavik, paying an extortionate amount for it, or having to order it via Amazon, and it is an extortionate amount of money to get into the country. And the import export people are just an absolute nightmare. They're very difficult to deal with. But for example, I have a lot of audio foam around my around this little recording area, and also in the recording booth next door. And that's really difficult to get hold of because it's very specialized gear. Like getting microphones like this, or in like specialist interfaces or mixers, they're trips you have to take to the mainland to see what is available, and then you have to wait for the stuff like that to come in. So like really specialist stuff is really difficult to get hold of. One of the stranger things I tried to get was it's called scarring fluid. It's used for cosplay a lot, and it like you can make like fake scars and all that kind of stuff. I can't get it here. I can't import it either. Just not allowed to. So yeah, it's difficult. Yeah.
That's
Something
weird.
to do with the chemicals in it, and they're just like, nah, find a different way. I'm like, oh great, am I preferring to use latex? I really don't want to do that.
Wow.
But that's not something you can get on our tiny island. That's something you have to go to the mainland for.
Good grief. Yeah, I know that the Icelandic are very, how should I say, careful
Yeah.
about what they take in and send out. Like the iconic Icelandic horses. Once an Icelandic horse has left the island, it's never allowed to come back.
It's banished.
It's
You
banned.
shall not return. Yeah.
And it's really like that's how it is. So they have to think about, do we really want to export this specific horse? Because it never, ever comes back.
Yeah, and you can't import a horse either, because like the Icelandic horses have been separated from the rest of the horse population. I don't know how to phrase that. For so long that they really are like special. Like, they're super fluffy. And they can do all. They're really proud about how many types of horse trots they can do. I don't know what that means. They can do a bunch of things that other horses. I don't know.
The horse has a special flying trot that they can do. Called Hult, and that's just they're very proud of it, and it's so cool to do. I'm telling you, because you sit on the horse and you have the horse underneath you, and the horse is running as fast as he can in trot. He's not cantering, he's not galloping, he's just trotting, running, and you're like just keeping one level, and the animal underneath you is just like. Not moving. You're just sitting there on something that moves forward, and it goes fast. It's cool. So if you ever get the opportunity to ride an Icelandic horse, go for it. It's so fun.
Yeah, there are horses all over. Like even on our island, we have like I think half a dozen horses. The guys at the sanctuary were saying, like there's horses even on here, and they do little horse rides for folks who are willing to pay for it in the summer too. It's really easy to get onto a horse riding thing within Iceland if you wanted to. So yeah, like that's Icelandic horses. They are very fluffy and they are very cute. And you just see them all over the place.
Here I come with my Swedish warm bloods that are like taller than myself, and then looking a little pony. I was like, who are you? But and they are all sometimes. I don't know really about the ones that are living on Iceland, because I've never seen an Icelandic horse on Iceland. I've seen an Icelandic horse in Sweden, and they are more fat and round than they are tall.
Yep, they are sturdy, stocky. That's the word. They're quite stocky.
Indeed, they're very stocky, but very cute. So if you ever go to Iceland and get the opportunity to ride an Icelandic horse, do it. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah, and also because they can take you to places that cars can't. And like generally speaking, Iceland is unbelievably beautiful. Like it can be hours before you see another living soul, and that's traveling between places, like between like major cities and stuff, especially when you get past the kind of east and the south side of the country. When you head up towards the north and over to the west, sorry, over to the east, like it can be hours before you see anyone, and you drive past waterfalls you can just see from the road. And I've had the joy of going up to Eyjafjallajökull, which is the volcano that went. I had the joys of going up there on a snowmobile, and the view is incredible. It's just it's very difficult to describe, like the top of that kind of like glacier and top of that volcano area, of just seeing this like almost column of ice, which has kind of like, it looks like a like a wave in the ocean has just been solidified in ice. It's unreal to see up there. There's so many parts of Iceland that are gorgeous to see. Waterfalls, mountains, general lay of the land, and a lot of it's untouched because it's, you know, we can't live there. It's awful to live there. Don't live in the Highlands. It's terrible, but it's a great place to visit.
And that's probably what it's meant to do as well. Just visit. I guess the tourism up there is kind of extraordinary.
Yeah, like the touristy areas they're well set up for tourists. They're well set up. The places to stay. The people are usually quite nice. Things are expensive, and you should be aware of that. But as soon as you get out of places where people live, the land is just beautiful.
Yeah, I bet I want to go. The only time I've been to Iceland is we did a short stop there, going from Stockholm to New York, and be aware that if the weather is not good, it will be a rough flight into Reykjavik. My mom was an air stewardess and flight stewardess for 17 years. So and my dad was a pilot. So I come from a flying family. With that said, I've never had any experience working in the industry. But when you have your mom, who's been for a long time in the industry, sitting and holding tight, praying to God that we're going to land safely, and you look over, and I was 15, 16 years old, and I look over and I see my mom being scared of flying. That's when I realized, oh shit, this is not good. This is not good. That was the toughest flight I've ever in my entire life been on. And I hope to never experience it again. That's all I'm saying. Now I know.
I'm not surprised. Like I say, I used to come back and forth like really quick, really easily, especially before Brexit, when it was just like, it was as easy as getting on a bus, but I had to show my bus pass. Like it was kind of like easy to come and go. And the flight's about 3 and a bit hours from the UK, at least where I lived. And yeah, like the landings and the takeoffs are just, they can be incredibly bad. Like the turbulence is like when it starts and you're just kind of like, you're about an hour out. It ain't stopping. It is not stopping until you land.
And the drops the airplanes does, I cannot understand until today how the wings still kept on being on that aircraft. They did not break, but they were like literally bent up like that, and the aircraft went downhill.
Yep, it's wild. It is like genuinely just like apart from like the roughness of like apart from the roughness of like flying in, I've been seeing people taking photos as they've been landing, as they're coming in, because there's been a lot of volcanic activity in a place called Grindavik, which is just outside of where kind of a little bit away from the airport and just outside of the Blue Lagoon area. But you can see the volcanic eruption as you're landing. It's awesome.
Isn't it a little bit scary though to live so close to volcanoes that are actually active?
So if I look out my window, I can see 2 volcanoes on my island. One of them is active and one of them is not. One of them is active as far as it will go off in the next like 200-300 years, but it still could. And I can also see the volcano from my kitchen window on a clear day to the volcano that stopped all the air traffic like 10-15 years ago, whatever it was. Like I can see that from my kitchen window, and it is quite a distance away, but I can still see it. But luckily for us, because the current volcanic activity is in the peninsula, really close to, funny enough, where the airport is, we don't feel any of those vibrations. We don't we don't need to worry about the lava. But the day that it erupted the first time, I think November, I think it was, we could see the clouds forming and getting darker and darker as they came across us. It was wild.
I do remember when you said before about the aircraft getting hit by that volcano. I was like, yeah, that's right. There was something right before or around the time that I moved here with the volcanoes, and they had to I can't exactly, but it was huh, yeah, that's right. It was something
Yep.
going on back then. You know, I didn't have to fly. It was either before or after I flew. It must have been before we moved over, and it, or whatever. And it, since I didn't have to fly, I didn't have to be affected by it. But I do
Yeah.
remember it was like, yeah, that's right. It was something going on there.
Yeah, it was a pretty
health-
big.
How about healthcare? Do you have a doctor or hospital on the island? What if you get sick?
Well, that's one of those big old luxuries you have to figure out if you can live with or not. Ironic, we're talking about healthcare. So we do
daily. Yeah, I can see you must have a doctor among 4,000 people. Somebody that got to be a doctor. But what if you break a leg? What if you have a heart attack or a major thing? I work on the ambulance. I work EMS, for goodness sake. I work with 6 people every day. I was like, I'm not going to respond. Do you have an ambulance?
one of my former lives. I used to be very heavily involved in the care industry. I used to work in hospitals and nursing homes and home care. So I've kind of done the gamut, apart from being an actual doctor, prescribing medication, and being an EMT. So yeah, it was a little concerning. We have one hospital on the island, and it is for basic needs. It is I have a cold, I have a flu, can you check my blood to make sure there's nothing wrong with it? I need diabetes care, I need a little bit of physical therapy. So generally, if there's nothing majorly wrong with you, generally speaking, the island has you covered. But if you need more specialist care, you end up having to go to the mainland, and that is a 45 or a 3-hour ferry, dependingly. And then it's either a 2.5-hour drive or an hour drive to get to the capital, where you'll have to then find the hospital, park, do all the things, and then you've got to try and get home the same day. Often people don't bother. You go there one day, you sleep overnight, you come home, because it's such a hassle because of the times of ferries. So if you need specialist care, you have to come to you have to go to the mainland. Emergency care, because most people here have or do serve on boats. A lot of them have to be first aid trained to a certain degree. Anyone who serves above a certain rank on the ships have to be really well trained, because if you're out at sea and somebody breaks their arm or anything like that, they have to be able to sew you up. They have to be able to get you in a stable condition to get the boat home. That's just the situation. So a lot of people on the island know a lot of first aid. So that's kind of like a general nice relief. But the nurses here are just phenomenally amazing. I did CPR training with a couple of them about 1.5 years ago. They were telling these stories on, we have volcanoes, we have mountains here. There was one of the nurses was describing a situation where someone had a really major heart attack on top of one of the mountains. So we have rescue crews here, and they do all sorts of rescue crew stuff. They'll do diving in the oceans if someone goes down, and they'll also be able to climb this mountain in 20-minute runs. Like, this thing should take you an hour and something, and they'll leg it up there. They are these big beefy men. You think, nope, they're fucking gone. And this woman was this nurse was explaining how when she got up there, they basically did compressions for 3 hours until the helicopter could get in, because the weather was bad, which means the helicopter couldn't get in until the weather had cleared. So there's a couple of rescue helicopters
in the world. I'm being trained in this. First of all, compressions for 3 hours. I hope you were more than one person, or you would have to.
Yeah, there was a team of them up there.
But then also, did they get him back? Because not only is it cold, which may preserve the heart in a sense or not, but keeping somebody going by just compressions for that long time.
Yep. They had so they've got the
he survived. Do you know?
Yeah, he did. He had a defibrillator. So they had a bunch of stuff up there, a bunch of equipment. They took up everything he needed to keep him warm. They kept him going until the ambulance arrived. And that's kind of what the nurses and the doctors hear. If there is a genuine emergency, there's no surgeon on the island. There's also no eye doctor on the island, which pain in my ass. But yeah, like it's so there's no emergency services here. So they pride themselves on being getting going and keeping someone stable long enough to get onto the air ambulance. And there's a couple, I think there's 2 of them for the south of there's one of them that serves the south of Iceland, and there's another one that can cover if there is a problem. So it is a case of like, if the weather is good, if the weather is really shitty, we don't have ambulance care. And if the ambulance needs repairs, we don't have ambulance care. And those have to be carefully scheduled around when the ferry is going, because if it's the summer, we can kind of get away with not having the ambulance because we can put them on the ferry, run the ferry at double time, and get it to someone to the island, off the island in about 20 minutes. But that's never had to be, no, it has to be used once. But other than that, like, we are very dependent on having good enough weather for the helicopter to land. If it was based here on the island, it can take off in bad weather, but it can't land. So,
bottom line is, don't get sick.
Kind of, yeah. Or know somebody with a boat, which almost everybody in the island does.
Yeah, that I cannot see being a problem. A lot of people have boats, but then it's also, what kind of weather is it, so you can make it like there in a timely manner.
Yeah, it is. It like care is especially on this island is one of like the biggest concerns. Like, if you're planning on moving here and you have like major medical issues, or you have a family, and being in range of a hospital is something you absolutely have to have, you cannot move to this island. It is not a thing you can do. Luckily, I am bereft of children, so that's not a thing I need to worry about right now. But yeah, like, any emergencies, the people here on the island are amazing, and they will get you on that helicopter, or they will get you on that boat, and you'll get to the mainland, but then you've got to get to the hospital, or someone will have to fly you there. So that's just the situation as it is. It's difficult, but
they have had to adapt to the situation they're in, and they are training after what they need. So they're probably more trained in this more awkward, weird situations than even the Reykjavik crew and staff are that works at an ER and stuff like that. If you work,
I think the best way to describe it is kind of like the difference between like, if you're working as an auxiliary nurse on a ward, it's the difference between doing a day shift and a night shift. At least the hospital I used to work at, it wasn't an emergency hospital, it was elective orthopedics. So it's a case of like, okay, so on a night shift, it's me, 2 trained nurses, and 1 doctor. So if something goes wrong, we have to figure out how to fix this. Like, we can call people in, but they won't come in for at least an hour because they live far away or whatever it is. It's working with wake up the nurses, get them up, help. I know what I'm doing. No, I knew roughly what I was doing. So yeah, like, it is kind of like it's the difference between that and that. It's like learning how to make do with the resources that you have. You know, for the most part, other than not having a dedicated optician on the island, like, day-to-day healthcare is pretty set. We have like 2 dentists on the island. We have 1 GP. They're trying to find a second GP. One of them retired recently, so instead of having 2 doctors, we have 1. So we're always having substitute doctors coming in. We've had them in from like all over the Nordic countries. It's been hilarious.
It's been interesting.
Yeah.
They're like, no, this is a weird island. Let's get out of here. It's too small.
Yeah. The Westman Islands are they're interesting. It's an interesting place to live. They're very interesting people.
So, do you have an Icelandic visa? Since Brexit is now not a part of the European Union, how did that work out for you? I need to ask here, because that's a complicated situation. We're not going to go into the politics, but what how did you get a residency or a visa or whatever you have?
So I came to Iceland before Brexit actually officially happened. So I was here while the process was happening, but not when the deadline came in. So I managed to get my residency. I managed to get my visas sorted out basically before that hard deadline came in. And that means I have the same rights as any other EU resident. So, for example, a German person can still come and live here in Iceland. They can still claim whatever benefits. And yeah, they still have to register with Icelandic immigration, but they don't you know, as long as they can support themselves, they're good to go. And I still have that same right because I was here before Brexit. And that is a case of literally going on to UTL, which is the Icelandic immigration office, and then clicking one of the visa options, and it's like, do I have a job? Do I not have a job? Am I a student? Am I not a student? Am I searching for this? And it's like 20 questions. That's kind of it. But post Brexit, because I have all my rights from before, I don't need to worry. But post Brexit, we get treated the same as anyone else who comes from any other third nation that isn't part of the EU or part of the Schengen area. The Schengen area being, as you probably know, Sweden and Iceland and the UK, I think, for a little bit. So like it's they now have to do yearly submissions for visas to make sure they get updated and redone every year up to a certain point, and then they get permanent residency. You have to submit a criminal record check before you can even apply. It's a whole host of issues that I thankfully don't have to do anymore.
Right. I came right before. So that means that you must have been there during COVID as well.
Yep. I had been working at my job for like 4 or 5 months at that point, and I was slowly shifting my way up the ranks, and then COVID hit. And my job, I was lucky that my job could apply for 50%. No, 25%. So the Icelandic government stepped in and said, we will pay 75% of the person's wages, and you have to pay for 25%, but they can only work 25%. If they work more, you pick up that tab. So I did 25%. I did 25% at either, I did 25% here at my computer.
Because what do you do in front of your computer? I know what you do, but for everybody else, no clue what it means to say. On Facebook.
Yeah. No, so I was a duty manager for quite a while, and because the company was really, really new, they didn't have many policies or procedures. For example, if there's a missing child, how does that work? I wrote all of those. Health and safety rules on diving. I had the check-in buddies and all this stuff. I wrote a bunch of checklists. I did a bunch of ordering. I did all the kind of logistics that helped to keep people going. And if there was a delivery, I'd go pick it up and I'd put it outside the door, and then they'd come and get it. So the crew used to work in 2 shifts, Group A and Group B. They would look after the animals. And that's the only thing that happened in that building. But for me, I worked 25%. I worked at my desk doing all the ordering things, doing all the policy writing, fact checking, making sure that all reports got in, like that kind of stuff. And then slowly we eked me being back inside the building. So I was on one of the teams, and I started doing a little bit more housekeeping because everyone had forgotten where things go. Nobody remembered where to get the vinegar from. Certain things needed to be fixed. It was about the time that the baby pufflings, during one of the big shutdowns, the baby pufflings were coming. So I needed to build little enclosures for the baby pufflings. So I slowly eked more time back into that. But it was very, very difficult, especially when we really feared that one of our animal carers had COVID, because that meant we had one entire team that couldn't work, which means the other team would have to work like full on for like weeks on end. Luckily they didn't. Luckily we got the other team back in. It was fine. But we also found it really difficult working where I was during COVID, because that's the time we were trying to move the 2 beluga whales from being inside the building to their sea sanctuary outside the building. And that requires 40 people. And the gathering limit in Iceland at the time was 10. And we also needed, and we also required international teams to come in. So the vets, there are no Icelandic vets who know how to look after beluga whales, because that's just not a thing here. So we had specialists. So we had 3 vets coming in from all over the world. We had lifting crews, because you have to pick them up with giant cranes and put them on the back of stuff. We had tugboats. So organising and their health and safety around the COVID restrictions was my job. And that was a nightmare.
Wow.
So COVID was rough, but otherwise this island was fine. Like, we have very few like COVID incidents because, again, we're quite isolated. Nobody works full-time off the island, because if you work full-time off the island, you don't live on the island. So we were actually quite lucky here. We got affected. Yeah, things were tough, but it was nowhere near as Reykjavik or Selfoss. It was nowhere near as bad there. So we skated through a bit. But I'm also a homebody. I much prefer being at home, which is great, because then I didn't go out to see anyone. I didn't get affected, so it was fine.
Nope, leave me alone. I'm home You can
Yep.
call me if you need me.
Pretty much. Yeah.
I bet. Anything else you would like to add before we end this? This has been so interesting. I've learned so much about Iceland I didn't even know existed on another island. It's crazy. I'm not sure I'll be able to live there.
Yeah, I think like I've made the decision that my life is here now. Like I will be getting my citizenship when I can. I think about a year because my marriage means I could get it 1 year earlier than I would have done anyway. So like whatever. So like I'm planning to live here for the rest of my life. That's my plan. This tiny island, that's it. I'm good for now. Also, I never want to move to another country again. I can't cope with that. Yeah, it's just too much. But I would always recommend it as something to do. Because you can spend your whole life living in that one town that you grew up in, or maybe you were bold and want one town over. Oh boy, howdy. I did that. I regret. I should have gone further. I should have kept going. I did. I went to Iceland eventually. Because you are forced to learn something different. You are putting yourself in a situation where you have to be a little bit more vulnerable, and that opens you up to a lot more opportunities and experiences. And the worst that will happen is that you'll have to go back to where you came from. Like, it's not the end of the world. If things get busted up, just fly home, mate. Like, especially you're living abroad, you have your passport. You'll always be able to get back home. That's the one country that can't chuck you out.
But that's what I said when everybody's like, what if this doesn't work? I'm like, well, Sweden will always be there.
Exactly.
Like, I still have my Swedish passport. If shit happens, well, I'm coming home. That's not a big deal. So
yeah, it's not the end of the world, and it's definitely experience. Like, it opens your eyes to a lot more things. I mean, for me especially, it kind of definitely helped reinforce and really make me understand what's important. Because when you are slightly language limited, especially if you go to a country that does not share a language with you, you have to figure out what really matters. What words are you going to learn? I've learned the word for coffee, cafe, and cup of coffee, bottle of coffee. And it's a thank you, and you learn the words that are important, and those are the things that are important to you. So those are important things, especially when you start learning a language. And yeah, learning other people's suggestions and ideas, it opens your eyes up to different things, and it's fun. It's fun randomly in the middle of nowhere where you don't exactly know what's going on. Just, it's all right. I would, however, highly recommend getting a job and somebody who does know the language, who is sympathetic to you. That goes a long way.
knows your language could be a benefit.
Yes, I am. I am forever grateful that my husband is very fluent in English. I'd be screwed without him. I would not be able to make this work. I mean, I would eventually. I'd have to learn Icelandic way faster, but I'm very bad at it, and I'm just very happy that I have someone who can help me guide me through the system. But otherwise, yeah, just do it. Say the worst what happens is that you'll just go back again. Not the end of the world.
It will. Your birthplace will always be there, or home place, whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
It's all about, and for you who really moved to a secluded place, it's all about adapting and just take it as it is and not make a big deal out of it. And yeah, Amazon Prime will not come and deliver.
Amazon Prime will not deliver. I can't change the love of fish here. I can't make sure that my health and safety focused culture is like the culture here in Iceland. No, just that's my culture I'm trying to force on someone else. No, just go with what they have here. But yeah, just have fun at it.
Right. Thank you so much, Hem, for joining me today. I have, as I said, learned so much. It's been a blast. And I may come and visit you. Absolutely not moving to Iceland, not happening.
No, don't do that. I would never recommend that. I mean, I would totally recommend it if you're going to a major city.
Right. And I'll absolutely. I think I'm going to, in some way, make it to Iceland just for a visit, because it's a interesting country, to say the least. And
very much so. Yeah.
An Icelandic course again. So, thank you so much for joining me, and to everybody else, we will see you in 2 weeks. And I have no clue where in the world we're going to land then. So you better join us and look then. Have a good weekend. Bye-bye.